Commissioner Francis.
Here.
Commissioner Short.
Here.
Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Perkins. Commissioner Miles.
Here.
Commissioner Estelle.
Here. Next on the agenda is the approval of the August 21st, 2024 meeting minutes, and if all the commissioners have
Yeah.
a chance to read that, I'd like to get a motion on that, please.
And just so you know, on page 3, it says Mr. Helene said that, et cetera, et cetera. I have one change I'm going to make just to show the, probably going to change that word to cost, but regardless. Page 3,
Yes.
it says Mr. Helene said that the 2024-2030 6-year plan, that sentence, I might change the wording, but other than that.
Okay. So you already changed that?
I will, yeah.
Okay. Get a motion
I'll
on that?
make a motion and we approve the minutes with the change of the wording of the, on that page 3.
Sure.
Second.
Okay. Commissioner Shute? Commissioner Francis?
Yes.
Commissioner Short?
Yes.
Commissioner Miller? Commissioner Perkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Miles?
Yes.
Commissioner Estelle?
Yes. Next on the agenda is the final plat for Carriage Place, R2.
Good evening.
Good
Jay
evening.
Webb, Central Kentucky Land Surveying, here to represent Mr. Grant for Carriage Place Phase 2. It's the 57 duplex lots. I think most of the infrastructure's in. Looks like the blacktop I just came through is almost finished, isn't it, Alan?
Blacktop in phase 2 is complete.
Phase 2 is, yes.
30 ton in the morning, they'll finish the front entrance out and shut down the building in R3. Nobody run on it to cool it down.
Yep.
Done tomorrow, they're going around
Yep.
for the phase 1.
Yes, sir.
Kevin, you got anything on this?
I'll just add that it is verified, the minimum construction for actually Phase 1 and 2 is now acceptable under the minimum construction standards. However, if you make a motion to approve, I would recommend staff approval. We have just some items based upon the letter of credit quantities, very simple things, not a big deal, about getting those numbers in order to establish a letter of credit. It's very easy peasy kind of stuff, but if you would entertain a motion for staff approval, we'll be looking good.
Does any commissioners have anything? I get them.
Did you say it was minimal standards?
There is a list of minimum construction standards. What those are is at least a base coat, functioning storm system, your street signs, and wayfinding, stop signs, things of that nature. Outside of that, anything else can be bonded or applied for a letter of credit, such as striping, final coat, sidewalks, any type of grading, things of that nature. Mr. Grant has the minimum construction completed. So he's actually brought up Phase 1
Yeah.
to standards now, right along with Phase 2. So actually, as this meeting goes, he is in much better standing with Phase 2 than he was in Phase 1. But he has brought both phases into compliance today, and possibly before. But my field inspectors, I had them go out today to double check. Everything is okay in the field. It is a matter of paperwork.
That one was what we brought up the other meeting. Was that the one?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Commissioners, when I get a motion on that, please?
I propose a motion, we approve the final plat for Carriage Place with staff approval and Kevin's blessing.
Second.
Okay. Commissioner Shue?
Yes.
Commissioner Francis?
Yes.
Commissioner Short?
Yes.
Commissioner Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins? Commissioner Miles?
Yes.
Commissioner Estelle?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next on the agenda is a revision of the development ordinance, short-term rentals.
You skipped one, Eugene.
I'm sorry, streetlights, I skipped one. Revision of the development ordinance regarding streetlight.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'll sort of take the lead on this one. What you see before you in this single sheet and a little language on the next one, this information is given to you entirely out of my experience. I've dealt with streetlights ever since I've worked with the city, day one. And what I did during those years is that the utility companies, mainly Kentucky Utilities, and I must say that Kentucky Utilities is the only utility that has a contract with the city. Now, that goes into some detail, who does what, and we sign some papers, and off we go. Clark Energy and Bluegrass Energy, they do not have contracts. However, those folks are dealt with literally by phone call, and we have a conversation. Yes, we're ready for streetlights, come on out. And they do that. KU is a little more structured with the contract. We look at things, we identify phases of subdivisions such as we just passed, and a lot of language goes into that contract that I review. They also turn in a diagram, if you will, or a layout of streetlights. That's what they, Kentucky Utilities did for 13 years in my reign in the field. I would simply look at that, go over it, make sure that we don't have things going to wind up in driveways, in the dead center of houses, too close to fire hydrants, yada, yada, yada. Minimum spacing, things of that nature. So as I look at these things over time, I get pretty good at how they do things. In a recent meeting with Clark Energy and KU out at Parkview, we're all familiar with Parkview off of Tate's Creek, the subdivision being built by Jeremy Rigney. That subdivision is unique because literally on one side of a proposed street that they've built lies Clark Energy. 25 feet away, on this side of the street, you have KU. So a meeting was asked for, and I went out and met with these gentlemen. And in that meeting, Kevin Jeffers, who represents KU now, used to be Jonathan Lane, but it is now Kevin Jeffers. And in short, they do not want to provide the lighting layout that I looked at and approved due to liability reasons. We won't get into the stories he told about being sued because something was too bright or the location was bad because they chose it. So what we're doing is I've come up with a way to ease the development community. There are two options. One is we require them to get a photometrics plan and enlist the services of a design lighting engineer. Can be very costly, okay? I'm sure those developers, if we were to pass something like that, would get a little excited. They're spending a lot of money to start with, and if we dump on them, we need another engineer that could cause a ripple in the pond, we'll say. So I've took it upon myself to choose a second option. I've laid out here, hopefully you've read this, kind of understand what I'm after here. In the construction drawing process, once you approve a preliminary plat, then I will receive the construction drawings in-house and I will review those, which is the nuts and bolts on how to put this subdivision together and build it. I'm going to require that those streetlights are part of that construction drawing. Prior to that, in the past, the streetlight layout sort of came when it was needed. A little later down the road, and it was treated as a separate item and was always enforced that streetlights were there before I gave up a letter of credit. Okay, I held that for ransom. Now what I'm going to do is require the design engineer, civil engineer, to lay these poles out on the subject property under these guidelines that I'm providing for spacing. These spacing requirements are a reflection of what I'm used to dealing with in the field and dealing with those utility companies over time. I am comfortable with this, and what this will do will allow the civil engineer, the one that's drawing the subdivision anyway, to follow these guidelines and put these poles in according to these recommendations, therefore eliminating the need for a second engineer to be contracted by the developer and incur whatever expense. So if they follow these distances and layouts and the scheme of how this is done, they can put that right there on the construction documents. It will be part of my review. I can approve these locations, and then the utility company, as I'm told by them, we don't care where they're at, we'll run power to them no matter where they're at. Well, okay, if we look at this and we get the poles laid out, it doesn't matter where they're at as long as they're okayed in review, the power company will simply run power to wherever these locations are, and that is what they've stated. And that's what they want to do, and they will not no longer provide us a layout. I'm getting a layout from them for Parkview as a one last time. And they said that they never did that, and I explained to them, no, you have before, but that's their new policy, so out of respect for our utility companies, and that's how they want to do things, this is being prepared to remedy that situation. So, in closing here, I'm comfortable with these distances. I look at this stuff every day. It is a recommendation for a new ordinance. So if it entertains this body to do so, we could make a recommendation, but I would be happy to take any questions in regards to that.
How does this compare with the other cities locally in Kentucky? Because you said if it's not proper, we could get sued. So how does this get compared to that? Is it pretty standard, or?
It is standard spacing. What was being done in the past, they were mimicking, the utility companies were mimicking something that you see occur everywhere. The 200 to 300 foot spacing is always based on the luminance of the light. Okay, so we have to take into consideration now that we don't have monofilament and types of lighting like that. We have LEDs, their longevity and things, their luminance is different, and therefore these spacings can get out here, and that's where the 200 to 300 feet is being derived from. And that's what has always been used, I know, for the past 6 years. If we get more technology that is brighter than what the LEDs can cast, then, you know, I understand what you're saying. If they're too bright, you go around the curve, and oh my goodness. But the lighting engineers for the independent utility companies understand this, and they can't put something out there that looks like the Statue of Liberty and blinking and this thing. You know, they have their luminance values, and those are in-house. So with respect to trusting their lighting engineers on the bulbs that they're using, you know, for street lighting, we have to accept that because that is their choice.
To me, it would make sense like what you were saying, if it's in the development plan and everything's there, the specs, everything are there for them, I mean, that would be the ideal place to do it when development is done.
Yeah, and maybe,
rather than have to come back.
Sure, it actually puts it out there and goes, it will go ahead and take care of that. There won't be something coming in months and months down the road that you have to deal with. It's already mapped out. Dr. Miller, in regards also to your comment, you know, we have no lighting luminance ordinance based upon street lights. These things have been in effect since I've been here 13 years. It's just whatever the utility company provided. There's nothing other than our typical lighting ordinance in 412 that says if you're going to put up lighting for parking lots and you're adjacent to residential subdivisions, you know, we have to have a photometrics plan. you get into the whole 0.5 candle power, 5 feet head high, property line, you get into all that. There's nothing in there that says the luminance of a streetlight. And those are calculated by the utility companies to light the areas efficiently enough till you get to the next one. And that's how they calculate their lighting ambience. So that works out to generally, on average, 250 feet apart. And that applies to your standard colonial style, like little black poles. Some are acorn, some are colonial, all the way up to the Cobra headlights, that are the big steel ones with the arms out. All these things are calculated, and a lot of times the 250-foot average still applies. And that comes from the utility companies. That doesn't come from our ordinances or anything.
It's a bit more work for you, isn't it?
No, I did it anyway.
You did, okay.
This just puts it all in one deck for
Okay.
myself.
Okay, well, that's
A
good.
lot of times I would do plan review for the subdivision, and I would have to wait on the utility company to give me that layout before I released a letter of credit. So I would have to work through all that process, and that only came when either the developer wants to know if he's done, and I'd send the guys out or myself, and I'd say, oh, well, we got a little bit of sidewalk here, we got a problem over here, and where's my streetlights? That kicks that off, typically was the trigger mechanism. And then the utility companies contact me, they send me all this pretty stuff. And in that mechanism to getting their letter of credit back, that was usually part of it. That's how it sort of started. This puts it out there, goes ahead and gets the locations done. The utility company is already aware. They're the ones signing the plats. The little drawings are there, the little symbols, everything is there. They see that. And when they sign that plat, that's their approval, that they understand that's where those poles are and that's where they gotta go.
So normally, they didn't have those lights figured in until after the subdivision was built, versus now they're gonna have that kind of laid out, so now the developer says, okay, now I'm gonna have to deal with the lights here, 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 and here. Is that correct? I mean, when were the
Correct.
lights figured in, I guess? Was it the last thing when they were
Lights
walking out
were
the door?
almost always last.
Gotcha.
Mr. Grant here, I don't want to use him for an example, but Pavilion Way, we just got lights out there. Now, we don't want to get into some details, but we all know how long Pavilion Way, Pavilion Golden Leaf.
Yeah.
I'm actually talking about Pavilion Way, the one in the back where Julius Dahl and all those folks live. We just got those Cobra head lights 5 months ago, maybe, the most.
So could you make the initial rough-in and pole bases part of the minimum construction standards before you even approve the final plat to alleviate that? And then my second question is, if this gets approved, what do we do about these subdivisions that are kicking off now, if you're looking for uniformity across the board and we're just now starting to build in other places?
We're in a unique situation right now because we have some subdivisions, pleasant experience, we have nobody in here from our last meeting. But, let's say Hampton Way kicked off, then I would still have to fight through dealing with getting these things laid out because the utility companies will no longer provide layout. So I would have to work through that. Currently, we don't have any subdivisions about to kick off. So we have this grace period right now, and that's why I'm kind of pushing this. And I didn't know that until I went out and met with Clark Energy. All this came up, and I thought, okay, we got a problem. Here's my proposal of a solution. You're talking about conduit and things of that nature, pedestals. Well, the utility companies install the pedestals. They install the light poles. Nowadays, they're actually installing the conduit. What I require and what's going to make it nice in plan review and have it part of the construction documents, and I did this in the field. I said, look, guys, any road crossing must be in before I do a compaction test. That's well before gravel goes down. You're not going to dig through the gravel once it's compacted. You're not going to dig through the road when it's paved. Any street crossing must be done. So I would make them prepare. And they would have to talk to the utility providers on their own to get this worked out, to plan for the future. What will happen now is that in plan review, we will see these poles and where the transformers sit. And if transformers are on one side of the road and we need to have crossings under the road, then the developer knows he's got to put those crossings in so that the wire can be pulled and the road will not be disturbed once it's created. And so we sort of worked our way through it in the past. This will a little bit streamline it, that it's on paper and not planned for in the future, but it's on paper.
Gotcha.
I feel a little uncomfortable doing this because I don't know anything about street lighting. And I know you do. But how would this compare with somebody else's in Kansas City and Michigan or whatever? I mean, can you defend this, the lighting, et cetera, like that? If somebody comes to us and says, you know, it bothers me a little bit me to say yes on this and then, you know, it not be what we wished it to be, you know, because I don't know enough about it. Unless you guys are experts in street lighting.
Who else would be?
I don't know.
You
That could
can-
complain about it, huh?
You can simply, I can say, Dr. Miller, that it compares. But I encourage, if you have second guesses, thoughts about it, and would like to look at it further, by all means, you can look up any city across the state or states across the country, jump around, you'll probably find that a lot of these are between the 200 and 300 foot range. It is comparable. I encourage you to look around, but just look up street lighting ordinances and see what you come up with. You'll get, if you go to Louisville, be careful. Louisville is a little different animal because they're mechanical. They're a huge city, so they're going to have a lot more stringencies than what we're seeing with just subdivisions. What we have to compare, if you do some research, be sure that you're comparing a subdivision for a local street, not something in the heart of Louisville or Cincinnati or something, because these things get far tighter, and then they consider crime rate and things of that nature, and they condense these things down. In our situation, we're looking at general subdivisions. So we want safety, but we don't want a light show shining in your bedroom windows or something that nature. There's that happy medium, and that is typically between the 200 and 300 foot mark. But by all means, you're welcome to check those out.
What's allowable for a subdivision? The lighting part, I mean, the brightness of it.
I actually don't know the lumens that the utility company provide. I can certainly get that. It'd be an easy phone call. But if they looked at me and they said, well, it's 36 lumens, I honestly wouldn't be able to tell you the difference in 36 lumens and 28, what the difference would be. In reality, the only way that I could demonstrate that is we all go out somewhere and have KU plug in a couple different bulbs and demonstrate that for us. I mean, not being funny, but that's really the only way I personally would know the difference. What I see in subdivisions is something that's not super bright, but I don't have any idea what lumen that is.
Scott, go ahead, I'm sorry.
The reason why I asked that, you can go through some of the subdivision now, and they've got that, I don't know, but the sodium type, they're kind of an orange cast and whatever to it.
There is
Now, those right there are useless, I'm gonna tell you. They
And
are.
what I have discovered is that Clark Energy's colonial light poles don't entirely look like KU's colonial light poles. And therefore, they only try to recommend to me that they'll make them pretty much the same. And okay, I'm not so much worried about looks. I'm worried about when you drive down the street and we stop KU and we pick up Clark and we have this bright white and then it goes to an antique.
Yeah.
and it looks like this one's going out compared to
Yeah.
this one. So I understand all that, but I don't know how we're going to get around that from the actual provider of that area.
Well, the reason why I asked that, because I've noticed in some subdivisions later, they're going around and changing out to a brighter light than they taking the old, like, different color one out and putting a brighter bulb in there.
It's kind of like you say, if we don't do something kind of like this, it'll have to be like on an individual basis for the developer to contact like a lighting engineer and have them do it on a case-by-case basis.
And it will be based on that engineer's opinion.
Yeah, it could be different engineers.
What you have here is location.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's all
That's all
I'm
we're talking
proposing,
about.
because I am not a lighting engineer. But I can certainly lay them out. But as far as the technology on lumens,
Right.
I don't
Sounds like
know.
we're all
Getting
that
ahead
way.
of the game because of what they're forcing you to, because they're,
And that's where I'm at,
yeah.
Commissioner Shue, because let's say next month, somebody comes in with a subdivision and there's no problems with it. We don't have pitchforks and everything else going on. And it goes through the process very quickly, then I will be dealing with that. And it's not that I can't, it's just, it'll be an issue.
Well, it sounds like it's very streamlined and a common sense way to deal with all of this. But probably in about a decade, we need to revisit because of changes in technology.
What you could look at, aside from Commissioner Miller's concerns on spacing, if you happen to have been okay with spacing, we can always look at a second ordinance that says perhaps we need to check in every 3 to 5 years,
Yeah.
5 to 10 years, whatever it may be, have a consultant give us some information on technology, brightness, safety standards, crash ratings, who knows, whatever.
Yeah, that would be my only
Just
addition to this.
reevaluate. Yeah, I mean, because it's changing, it's every day changing,
Yeah.
all your light bulbs.
Yeah, now you don't want to go over it every 6 months, but I think a time frame
And that's why,
is reasonable.
in my own capacity, I am only dealing with spacing. Now, you can take and space things out 500 feet apart, but you can put a light bulb in there that looks like the sun and pull off the same thing from light poles that are 10 feet apart but look like a little tiny candle. You see what I'm saying? So if we determine a distance, then what we have said is a precedence for the utility companies to provide for. So if they say, oh, we understand it's an average of 250 feet to the next one, then we need to provide a light that's ambient enough to reach half that distance so the one in front of it can come back to it and you sort of light that area, but not be over bright to where they overlap. Now, that's in their wheelhouse. But we can check on that, we can get a little smarter. That wouldn't be a problem.
You got any more questions? So we can vote on this.
Certainly, and
He's not there?
as far as a recommendation for this ordinance, I would
Table.
believe that if you could entertain a motion to accept what you see here as an ordinance pertaining to our street lighting dilemma in some form or fashion, that would then send it on to the city commission for consideration to become an ordinance, and then we can enforce it.
I would agree with that. I would propose that with the addition of reassessing it in what would y'all consider a
5 years.
reasonable, a 5-year timeframe? Okay,
Like it's,
So-
like it's a good,
okay.
like it's a good.
We can
idea.
add into this, where it is most appropriate, that the city has the right to assess street lighting
To
and its
reevaluate
ambient
it.
properties every 5 years or something. Then we can bring in somebody on our own accord to say, hey, we're averaging 250 feet apart. What about these lights? Oh my God, those are too bright.
Way too much.
Well, then we can get streamlined.
I get a motion on it, please?
Yeah, I'll motion that we accept the provision for the street lighting with, with the provision that it be reevaluated in every 5 years.
I second.
Okay. Commissioner Shu,
Yes.
Commissioner Francis,
Yes.
Commissioner Short,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Miles,
Yes.
Commissioner Stell.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next on the agenda is the revision of the development ordinance short-term rentals.
Mr. Chairman, nobody's here to speak. We'll go ahead and take the point on this one. We kept this pretty simple. We would like to keep this open. Hope you guys had a chance to think about all the possibilities that could occur. With that, we're just presenting you a very simple table that says this is allowed here. I would leave it open for discussion. This is simply a recommendation, and we can change this on a whim and look at this as one item for a motion until we get back here a little further. But all we're looking for right now, after discussion, would be a recommendation for the zone.
Well, I looked up some things and gave you some recommendations.
You did.
Yeah, and you've edited most of them, and it looks good, except what I don't understand is if the host is supposed to be available, the place that's causing the problems, are they the only one that have the host number? So you're living next to me and you're
Ms.
causing a lot
Miller-
of problems, and I want to call the host and tell him somebody's dealing with his property, because he'd probably like to know.
Well, respectfully, I think that's going to be our second one. If we can just figure out a zone to start with, because
Oh, okay,
that's
start
our
with the
huge
zoning.
problem right now. And if we get a zone, because what's happening right now with current ordinance, it's have at it. If we need to set a zone first, and then by all means, we're going to pluck apart what I have placed before you on amending the ordinance. And we can get into the super
Okay.
details. But if we can just talk about, stay focused on just what zone you guys would like, that's kind of like 50% of this issue.
I don't understand why you can't do R2.
Well,
What's the problem with doing R2? I know you had a reason.
well, the thought process, not only mine, but consensus among peers, is that if you have a duplex and you live in one side, I live in one side, you rent the other side out, you have the possibility of a minimum of 4 or more new neighbors a month with traffic in and out. So I guess it would be the privacy that you're connected directly to this happening. The concept of noise, certain types of people renting and things with a person that is looking at the duplex to be their home.
Right.
Do you want to introduce a multi-use next door on the other side of the wall would be what you would have to consider.
Part of I called and talked to you this week about this, so that R2 would almost comes into my business thoughts. And I was saying if we have a loft with a business downstairs, I don't know what chemicals are down there, what they're doing down there. If it's a business, do they have different life safety requirements for fire suppression? If I have spilt fuel and I got young kids upstairs in an Airbnb, and they get sick or the building catches on fire, you deal with that issue. So I'm not a fan of the business aspect of it because of that. But then going to the R2, if you look at South Walton Beach in Florida, they respond to hundreds of fires a year because people from Kentucky and everywhere else go down there, catch the grill on fire in the backyard, and they're burning that house down and now affecting homes around them. So my thought is if I'm living in one side of a duplex and I don't know who's next door,
Right.
they could cause a fire, they're burning my house down. So, that's just my thoughts.
Yeah.
Right.
Good point.
So as far as the business side of it goes, I'm not against people having a business, but I wouldn't want my college-age daughter to go rent a place for Keeneland for a weekend. They're spray painting body panels, don't air the place out, and she's asleep upstairs. What does that do to, what risk do we put those people in? So that's my thoughts on that, and
Right.
Kevin, if you got any input on that.
Yeah, we have the possibility of loft apartments in some of our commercial zones. That's not a recommendation, that's just a possibility for you to think about because it could come up. So if we don't address it and explicitly allow it or deny it, somebody's going to ask. Something else, in addition to those comments, is going to be some of your loft apartments are challenged by parking. Because, if you imagine being upstairs across the road and you're bringing people in every day that aren't familiar with, one, where they can park. They may be parking in our parking lot, they could be parking up and down the street, taking up all kinds of things, how many people are in there. A little rough to think about what could happen. Now, I will express, we have plucked this thing apart, let me tell you. We have plucked it apart all the way down to a certificate that they gotta have. In thinking about this, a lot of these folks, no matter what happens with the zone recommendations, a lot of them aren't going to make it past the inspection process. So, with that being said, if you think about parking, which is going to be a dilemma in some cases, if we don't want to introduce that problem onto the city streets or overcrowding or parking in the yard and having code enforcement and giving them a headache, we need to consider very carefully what zones this is capable to be in. Not so much allowed to be in, but capable of being in. And by all means, we want folks to succeed, we want them to earn money, but what we've presented to you here are all of the options as far as we could possibly stretch. So, again, there are recommendations. If some are struck, hey, if all of them are struck, that's how it is. We cannot look at the current ones. They're grandfathered under the first ordinance. We have no inspection that you will see later tonight. They're not going to fall victim to that. They're there. I don't care where they are. If they're above City Hall, they're golden. We have to deal with those. But moving forward, we can lay ground rules, inspections, things that are required that aren't going to affect our neighbors, courtesy, how many's in the structure, all sorts of things. But I can ramble all night because we've got so much information we have accumulated. So we would entertain what you guys think a necessary zone for these would be.
And also, and then also about the apartments above the commercial, that's only allowed in B1 and B2. And if you went with what you're looking at, it would be conditional in B1 and B2. So they would have to go through a separate step of BOA to, on a case-by-case basis, say yes or no.
I wish Daniel was here, because, understand the commercial side of life safety,
Sure.
but when you mix it with residential, I don't know. I think he would be helpful in answering those questions, unless you already know the answer to it.
Well, as we move into the technicalities, let's say we have a zone and they apply for it and it happens to be, for example, a B1, it's a loft apartment. If that's what it becomes, then I have put back here some language that says you could succumb to building codes. You're already going to be us in the future, hopefully. You already have the fire marshal. He's the only one currently that's trying to handle this, along with what was a multitude of departments and now is my department. So I'm trying to streamline it so that it's very cut and dry and that nobody can slip through the cracks or argue what's right and what's wrong. But I have a provision later in the amended ordinance that would allow us, if we saw a deck on the back that seemed a little questionable, we have the opportunity to go knock on our fellow co-workers and say, hey, Daniel, could you send me a building inspector out here? I just don't know about this deck. That would allow us to do that. If the deck is a problem or unsafe, you failed inspection, you have the opportunity to fix the deck. But if the deck is not safe, you fail inspection, you do not get it. Doesn't mean it's the end of the line for you, but through the inspection, we can, life safety and some other things, we're able to address that. If this is the old one, have at it.
That's talking about an annual inspection, correct? That you have in here now.
Yes.
It's what's written on it. So
And again, to answer that question, I think we're getting over to that amended ordinance side. But what is a nightmare for my department would be, the way the old ordinance reads is that it must accrue 1 year from the time you're registered. Okay, currently we have 33 that we know about. Those are 33 independent 1-year dates, which honestly is a nightmare for us to keep up with. We're going to have to track these things and then notify them. What I'm wanting to do with the new one is November 31st. January 31st.
Either way.
That is renewal time. If you were registered 1 month prior to that, you're going to re-register a month later.
Yeah.
That way, that will tell us for that entire year, everybody that has been registered, that it's time to renew. That is just the easiest way to do that. These things are going to multiply. They're going to multiply, trust me. And when I saw the old ordinance and told that I was in charge of it, a little bit of panic set in. I thought, oh God, what do I do here? There's nothing really to inspect, and it was taken on by the codes inspection side of our once department, and they were tackling that as best they could. Well, some time has went by. We've heard all kinds of stories from tourism upstairs, all kinds of things in the community on some pay, some don't. Some trying to be fair. They're being fair while we're being fair when they're not, nothing happening to them. So that's where all of our amended ordinance changes are coming from. It needs to be streamlined.
So basically,
This-
one day you're all gonna eat your Wheaties and go with all of them.
Well,
Just
I can tell you, how many did we send out?
Or within a week or something, I'm just being facetious about it.
Yes. I prepared a letter, kind of rough, but I prepared a letter that was in relationship to that many not paying their transient taxes.
12 of them, 12 owners.
12.
Wow.
And they just don't pay them for whatever reason. So a letter has been sent out because we've been basically tasked with the registration and the enforcement side of it. Where business license comes, we've got all that worked out, everything is there. I'm just after some rules now, but that letter was sent out this morning. And so Tyler's gonna be getting a lot of phone calls.
Yeah.
And that's going to boil down to those individuals contacting the finance department to make arrangements to pay their transient tax, which is 3%. That particular part is in the the first ordinance. I can do that now. And it has basically been derived that we need to now draw a line in the sand because it's getting out of control. So once it got out of control, I get involved, my department has handled this, and we're looking at something that is a little hard to enforce. So we need from you ladies and gentlemen, the zone in which we can enforce, and then move to, if you're comfortable with recommending the changes.
But it looks like we're to R1, right?
And I say we leave R1C.
Yeah, I get good proposals about that, I agree.
Leave those in the B1 and B2
I think
out.
Gary would agree, I think you would agree, everybody would agree on one probably.
Sure.
If we're gonna do it, don't you think?
Yeah.
So what else? R1?
I would leave
That's it.
R1C out of it.
What about that?
It's right here. It's the,
Oh, we're not in charge of
No.
rural, so it doesn't affect us.
As
It's a
you
city.
deliberate, I will add this. I've put provisions in the amended ordinance back here that you gotta be 500 feet minimum apart from the next one.
That's what I was going to ask you. Can we get an example of center lines? Center lines
What-
throughout the structure.
What I have chosen is the dead center of the structure measured to the dead center of the next applicant. Now, a lot of people say, how the heck can you do that? Trust me, we can do that with our mapping software. It's very easy to do. I can tell you the exact distance from the center of this building to the center of the building you choose in Mount Vernon. I can tell you it down to the 10th.
Now,
So that's how I would measure.
and I agree with that. Now, my next thing is, if I add parking, like a driveway, to add for more parking to meet your ordinance to keep cars off the street, where does your center line of structure become? The actual domicile itself,
yeah.
or the width of the parking plus?
No, it would simply be the primary residence,
Residence.
dead center of it.
And that's
Yeah,
why.
He has the
R1C
parking already in there.
Yeah, but if they add more,
More.
now you push those cars closer to that next structure.
We have already an ordinance that says you cannot place a brand-new parking facility, parking lot, driveway within 5 feet of the boundary. And what that is for is a grass strip, aesthetics, keep it off your neighbor, and also side yard swales for stormwater. If you pave right up to the side, you could be pitching your water off. Now, I'm getting into stormwater, but to answer your question, they'll never get within 5 feet. Now, we're gonna have cases, and we've had them, off of 52 over here and into town on Second Street. You know, the lot is only like 30 feet wide. And as they try to produce their parking requirements, we have to see common sense. And if they're trying to do just, and they're in over parts of the town and everything kind of working out, it all looks the same, we'll let them cheat into that because it's a hardship. If it is not a hardship and there is ample space, then all the rules, regulations will apply.
So they couldn't pour a strip next to the other, to the old. If my driveway's here and I want to extend it, I mean, I couldn't go over that to that boundary line, right?
You could go within 5 feet of it.
5 feet of it.
I gotta be 5 feet away from it then, right?
Yeah, you could widen it out to within 5 feet.
Okay.
But then it goes back to the next portion that we're going to talk about,
Right.
falling within HOA rules and everything else that's in the next portion. Okay.
So again, that really is the first part of our chore.
Yep.
Is what is that pesky zone or zones
Yeah.
that we're gonna start with?
And what's in front of you would make it permitted in single family. It would make it permitted in mobile home park. And then conditional, so it'd have to go to BOA for every single one. In B1, so that's neighborhood business, and B2, which is essentially downtown. And that'd be it. That'd be the only zones that it could be in.
And again, this is just recommendation.
Sure,
You
sure,
can
sure.
you can strike these things out fast. You just name it, we'll mark them out. We'll get down to whatever zones you like.
Now, if we do the B2 for downtown, all that, they would still be required per Daniel's department for up-to-date life safety.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They'd still have to meet the building
What
code.
we're doing down here, I was exempt on a whole bunch of stuff on that building. And that's why I asked that question. What
Yeah,
happened to
well,
go
it
in
was
and-
due to the jurisdiction of that building.
Yeah, it was a mess.
It was,
Yeah.
long story
Well,
short.
you
but-
understand where I was going with that?
Yes, all will fall to that requirement. I don't care if you're in an R1 and you happen to have a 5-acre lot. You will still fall under every one of those requirements, if needed.
I don't see why we don't do downtown, because that's good for business,
Yeah, it is.
good for downtown business. So I think your R1s and your B2s would be.
As long as they're gonna check it frequently, make sure it's okay, then
Right.
B1 and
That's just
B2
my
over
input.
here seems like a reasonable.
Now, we talking about downtown, we talking about the lofts?
Yes, Eugene, yeah. It would only be allowed in the apartments and things on the second floor or higher. They couldn't do it at the front, at the first level.
And it could have a business under it?
My mind is churning as you're talking.
Huh?
My mind is churning. So if you were to entertain, and I'm hearing good for the city of Richmond, we need to understand that we have a 500-foot radius. So if we want to give courtesy to the ones in the B zones, that they can be a little closer. Because 500 feet from one loft to the next one, it ain't gonna take you very long, and you're out of the B zones.
You're out of the street, yeah.
Okay, so if you entertain, I'm just saying, think about,
That's
and we
a good
can fix
point.
that up, that maybe they're just allowed, as long as they're in those zones, they're fine. And no distances are required. But now some of you've got a couple Bs that, I got a B2, Saratoga, the old bar down here, I mean, that's a B2. Change it up, put an Airbnb in there, is that something you're interested in?
That's the one they remodeled out there, wasn't that old barn?
That's a
140
silly
East Main.
example, as silly as they can get, I guarantee you they'll happen.
Well, if you make it conditional,
Certainly. And if you do a conditional, maybe we just stick with 500 and we do a conditional, and then they can get relief from that if they are closer than 500 feet to one that exists.
Sure.
We can handle it that way, sure.
They'd have to bring it before you to ask that.
Yes, they would be asking for that conditional
Little
use with the
variance.
variance involved.
so we go to Board of Adjustments.
Mhm.
And that seems reasonable.
Yeah.
How would the parking come in play?
Parking, they will have to provide the parking requirements as set forth. So they got to be
Like for
off
apartments.
the right-of-ways, they have to have a designated area that's made aware of all tenants and so forth in the amendments. But they would fall victim to all of those things. Life safety, fire marshal, my guys checking parking, right down to the business license.
How many of rooms they got in that barn out there? Do you know?
I don't know.
So even in downtown, they'd have to have designated parking? How can they do that?
A lot of these folks, they're parking behind the building,
So most of the buildings,
It's,
okay.
I ain't gonna lie to you, it's tough, because it's very limited.
Yeah.
And so if you wanna entertain an Airbnb smack in the middle of town, I ain't gonna say it's gonna be easy. It will be a challenge. Some can pull it off, I'm sure, but not a problem, but some will be tasked with where to put these things.
But it's the same criteria as that I had an apartment. So,
Yeah.
you have to allow for that too. And that's not easy.
Well,
Can we go on
Lot
now?
to think about it.
So we're going to approve R1?
Now, can we go on now?
B2?
Well, I think Kevin's hoping for a motion one way or another on the zones first,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
I make a motion, not for approval of the whole thing, but I make a
Sure.
motion for that the ordinance for short-term rentals be only for R1 and B1 and B2 conditional.
okay. Just confirming, so permitted in mobile home park or no?
Excuse me?
Mobile home parks?
It's kind of,
You think so?
But Dr. Miller, also, I thought we were going to leave B1 out of this. Let's do the
Just
You just want to do
B2.
B2?
B2. B2.
I don't think we ought to do mobile park.
Okay,
I don't think so
I
either.
think there's
totally fine.
risk.
Okay, so change my motion
So-
to R1 and B2
Conditional. Okay,
and that's it.
and no mobile.
okay. Okay,
And no B1.
got it.
Okay. I'll second that.
Okay. Commissioner Shu,
Yes.
Commissioner Francis.
And you did say R1?
Yeah, it would be permitted in R1 and conditional in B2, and that'd be it.
Yes.
Okay? Commissioner Short, sorry.
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Miles,
Yes.
Commissioner Estelle.
Yes,
Okay. Cool.
okay.
Easy enough.
Next on the,
We got other things.
oh, that's right.
We're not done with this yet.
And then, yeah.
This, if nobody else is here to talk.
Nope.
I am so happy nobody's here. So, I think you got sort of the gist of where this has come from. So as I reviewed what was handed to me as an ordinance to enforce, I saw a great need for some addition, not change, addition. So what you see before you, everything in yellow has been introduced to the original document, and we have placed it where we felt it most fit. And so if you guys would like to discuss, I'd be happy to take questions.
I want to add a question though. If you're renting a place, in this here somewhere, I know it says that you can lease that out to somebody else, right, for a short-term rental?
And sublease.
You can sublease it.
Sublease.
But you can't do that unless you have that in the original lease that I'm aware of. If I rent a place from you, I can't sublet that out unless you, I was hoping our lawyer would be here, because I don't think you can do that unless it's in the original lease. Otherwise, I could lease places, and if it's in a big area, I could just lease it out for more than what I'm paying the rent.
Sure, you
Make
make a
money
business
on
out of it.
Yeah, a business out of it.
No, you can't sublease. Where's that?
I think you have to have it in the original lease, and I don't think a lot
I
of people
believe
would
so.
want
Unless
that.
it's an individual thing. I know the stuff I know our property, we have that written in our agreement that there is no
You
sublease.
have more experience than we do
Yeah.
about it, so
Because
I think
it-
you're gonna have to
it
ask the
can
lawyer
happen,
about
yes.
that.
Is that in here?
I don't believe so.
It's not in there due to, really, that's a transaction between two private
An
entities.
individual
Oh, then we
basis,
need
because
to
that's
add
what
that.
we've done, because you had to kind of cover
If
yourself.
that takes place, whether it's lawful or not, we would not be enforcing whether or not that's allowed. So that's why you don't see that. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's lucrative. I do know that one of our short-term rentals, you know, that person resides in California. And they bought a piece of property here and said, Airbnb. And that's how it happened.
And we can't write that in. No subleasing allowed.
If you write it in, I will just be honest, I don't know how my team
Would ever
How are you
know.
going to
Can-
enforce it? you know?
would ever know.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and
Be
then
on the
if we
host.
did know, moving forward to enforce it.
Well, you just ask the
Yeah.
people that are gonna, you have to get a license. You just ask them, do they own the home or do they rent it? And if they don't, they have to have a copy of the lease in. Man, that's pretty straightforward.
I'd at least put it in. It would deter some.
I think you should put
some
it
of
in. If you got a copy of the lease, you should be able to show it that you can sublease. Otherwise, I think you're gonna wind up in trouble with some of the people that own the property.
It could be dangerous.
They're not gonna really like that too much, I don't think. Would you like it?
No, I mean, that's,
I mean,
I'm
it's-
renting a house from you, but then I'm never there. I'm
Or
checking
even
it
if you
out.
are there, you rent it out, it gets torn up like
I
that, you
realize
know,
it's
and
not
then
kosher,
you're not
but
stuck
it's,
for it.
yeah, but,
The
I
owner's
mean,
stuck.
I get your point.
Okay, I would say.
So I think you need to ask the lawyer about that, see if we could put that, something in there.
Add no subleasing.
And the other thing I had was a host, if I get a problem at night and I contact somebody, how do I know who the hosts are? Are you going to put this on the internet, on the
It's
city?
inside the house.
So
No.
that you have the homes that are for this, short-term rentals, and the host's address and name?
It would,
So I can look it up, that the home that you're, is that, and I call the original owner that night?
well, I would assume that it would work as it does right now with just your neighbor and that you would call the police.
It's a what?
It would work just like as if you were next to Commissioner Perkins and she's throwing a massive party, you would just call the police.
I would like to.
Yeah.
Would y'all
Yeah.
like to come?
That might be, yeah, she might be a big problem that way, but wouldn't you want to alert the host? Wouldn't you want to alert the guy who owns the property?
I don't know how you would,
Oh, just
There-
put it
there's
on the-
nothing- there's
just put the-
nothing-
Put the name and the phone number on there. They've got to be available 24/7.
I mean, all I'm going to say is that for Freedom of Information Act, I have to redact all of that, so I don't know that we could legally put it online. Like, if you were to request to know, if you were to request, say, the form that was for the home, for this, like you want to know, I want the application they turned in, I would have to redact all that information anyway. So I don't know that we could put it anywhere. I don't know.
But see, you're putting.
I don't know that
on
answer.
the homeowner.
Yeah, I just don't know that
I have to
answer.
call the police. I'm having to get involved with it.
Can the police keep track of who owns the property? Because they're
I
going to
don't
be the
know.
ones to
Yeah.
receive the,
The complaint.
Yeah, it's going to boil down to the PVA. They're going to check the PVA, and, I mean, that's all we do.
Okay.
That's all we can do.
We had a thing in there, wasn't there somewhere about if you have infractions, you can only have so many infractions per
Yep.
per year.
Two a year.
So obviously, I don't know, I would think that maybe the police would, if you had to call the police on
Yeah.
her.
We would
they would
constitute that.
We're throwing you under the bus.
Sorry.
So again, I have
Party
to,
woman.
I have to take up the bull by the horns and call you and say, I've had 2 infractions over here. Well, that's not my job. That's your job. If you're going to approve this, then somebody needs to be available at night on this situation or available all the time. If you can't get a hold of the host, and I got to call the police.
Well, I put some stuff in here that says, that the Airbnb must provide X information.
right.
And one of those is a 24-hour contact of someone local.
But I don't have that number.
Well, that would have to be provided and be accessible at the
Well-
Airbnb as part of their package.
Yeah, that's
Doc-
why you should put it on the internet, so I can
But
look it up.
Dr.
go-
Miller's saying him as the neighbor.
Right.
I think the police, they
I
can,
mean, the neighbor,
if they have,
They're
and
not
I know
gonna-
they've done it,
Yeah.
they keep a record of how many times that they've been there to the
Such and
residents.
such address.
Yeah,
Sure.
they do that themselves, they keep, I mean, if I have to go to this, 2 or 3 times, they've got a record on how many times, because I've heard them
Oh,
report
they
stuff
know.
up here, they make a report on how many times that I've been to them. Well, when they're having problem with those college students, and they kept a record on how many times that they went there for parties, loud parties. So they-
we can talk to Chief and say, hey, here's a list of our properties. And we have that. We've already started it, tracking this conglomeration. But we can provide that to him, and perhaps if he gets a call, and it happens to be on this list, kind of like the most wanted list,
yes,
that, we have an infraction or something going on here, we need to send planning and zoning a heads up. Well, it may not work this easy, but, I get this, and the original ordinance says the director shall do this, and do this, and do this. If I get 2, I can pull the business license, I can terminate the business.
Now, you're going to be the director of this. You're going to be the one responsible for this, right?
I was the one spelled out.
But you're
Yeah.
going to be the one for the ordinance that's going to be the person I go to do something, right?
Yep, we'll be the enforcement
Because,
mechanism.
because ordinances in this town are not enforced very well. That's the truth. They're neglected. The people in codes don't answer your phone. They don't get back with you when you have a problem. They don't do any of that. And I'm on the board here, and I've been a citizen here for a number of years, and they still don't do it. So I can't imagine somebody that's new to the town that has a problem trying to get through to codes. So that's why I'm making sure that you're the one I'm going to go to.
I can instigate a lot of things with the ordinance. Now, if somebody's got a fire going on in the backyard,
No, that's
that's
different.
not me. Now, that might get back to me, sure.
But I want to make sure when we do this one ordinance, that's what's going to happen.
What this one ordinance will do will allow us to regulate and make sure, with the best of our abilities, that we're going to eliminate as many problems as we can foresee.
Oh, I understand, and
And-
that's good. I don't have any trouble with that. It's just that the city does not enforce their ordinances very well. Not at all. That's just the way it is. I can tell you from personal experience. So if we're going to do this, and you're going to be responsible, and I trust you more, that you're going to do it, and it's a violation of this, that people can call you and get this corrected. I don't want you in R1.
I'll tell
and
you right
can't
now,
get it
sure,
corrected.
all I need is in writing. I'll go to work.
Huh?
All I need is it in writing, and I'll go to work.
Okay. I
Did you,
trust you more than I do a lot of things.
Well, we talked about before about insurances. Were you able to find out anything about that, liabilities?
We discussed that a little bit, and I think if we demand proof of insurance, we thought, well, okay, how many different scenarios can we get here? They go out and they get insurance to get their Airbnb approved and the registration and all that, and then a month later, let's cancel it. We don't know that.
No, and I agree. There's no way to
But,
keep track of
and,
that.
and then if we do say, okay, you have $1 million, and we understand that, and we approve it, and it burns down, and it takes half the city block, and it's $80 million, are we liable because we only asked for $1 million? Just throwing that out there. So,
That's
would
up
it
to
be
your lawyer.
best- Would it be best to look at this in the light that the responsible party is that homeowner to carry insurance to protect not only themselves, but someone else being responsible? That's going to have all kinds of people in there.
I agree with that. It's
Well, I
just-
think the homeowner has
Like, what
to.
do you do?
Well, it's a great concept, but I just don't know how
You do it.
we would go about faithfully understanding that that'll work.
Okay, I'm gonna ask you a question. If I go to the insurance agent and I tell him what I'm doing, he said, well, I'm only gonna allow you $2 million. And like you say, it damages the whole block. Now, who's gonna be responsible for that? I mean, that's all he could get.
Well, if we're not playing a part in requiring it or
Yeah.
setting a number,
I mean, because you
We're-
can't tell him how much
we're
to
we're
get.
not part of the equation,
Yeah.
I think-
unfortunately.
Yeah, I think
It-
I think Kevin's saying that that'd be between them.
Can
That'd
we
be,
put in there, in the, something you can write in, that the owner of the property assumes responsibility, regardless of the amount. At the end of the day, I don't know how you do it, because if it's an LLC, you can only sue them for the value of the LLC. You're not gonna get any more than that out of it.
Right.
I don't know, it's just my thoughts, just my
And-
thoughts.
That's a lawyer thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not a
Shouldn't
lawyer.
we ask Fraser that?
I don't see how you can,
And the-
that's almost like forcing them to do that.
And then the renter
To
gets
take a
away
certain
with
amount
nothing.
out.
Right.
And I don't see how you can do that.
The renter.
It's a little tough.
Yeah, he gets off with nothing.
Yeah,
it's-
that's not
I
right.
don't-
He
you
should
know,
be
you know what I'm
liable too.
saying? I don't see how you can tell them you
Well,
gotta
I don't
have
think he can rent it unless you sublease it
$500,000
anyway.
worth of insurance on it.
And anybody that lets that's, I don't know about that.
I
My only
don't see
concern
how you can do
was,
that.
like I said, you rent an Airbnb,
Yeah.
Kingland's in town, everybody goes out and has a good time, get wild, come back, start cooking, accident happens, and then there goes that house and the neighbors and the neighbor.
Mhm.
It's not his fault, there was an Airbnb next door, and now he's affected by it. That was my, you know what I mean, that's what my thought
And-
process was with that.
And truthfully, not being the devil's advocate, because I love to know every option, that's just how I work. But are we prejudiced that it's an Airbnb, or are we prejudiced, or should we not be prejudiced that it's just a person living next door to a person? I mean, the person next door to the Airbnb could start their
I agree.
grill up
Yeah.
and burn the Airbnb down.
Mm-hmm.
So,
No, and you're right. I
I
only
just-
I only
not
made
in
that
disagreement.
assumption,
I
I only
just-
made that assumption on people being more responsible for stuff that they personally own.
sure.
Responsible.
and
That's why I
fact.
make that statement.
That is a fact.
But that is true, they're gonna have parties, things like that, and sometimes,
Making the assumption.
Now, I've been places where we rented and it was very quiet,
Right.
no problem at all, but you're gonna get some places, they're gonna have parties and things like that, so you're gonna have to have somebody have insurance, because that can get way out of control. Or the apartments up there we just said, B2.
I could only presume that if I had an Airbnb and I was going to introduce 6, 7 different rents a month, I'm just throwing that out there, to some strangers, that I would have insurance to protect my investment. I just would. I mean,
That would make common sense, but
Right.
it need not work. What would you do, Gary? If you rented them out like that? I'm sure Sherry has
A
a
lot of
plan.
liability stuff, it's a lot of way above my pay scale.
I'm sure Sherry has a plan already.
Sometimes when something starts burning, just let it burn.
it's a lot easier to clean up after.
Right.
Okay.
So anyway, there's a couple of things we need to talk about with the lawyer here, before we prove this.
Okay. I had 3 issues. Okay, this is under enforcement.
Okay.
Okay, it says the owner of any property in violation of this ordinance shall be fined not less than $100. Do they not receive a warning first? So you will have a warning?
So like, say you broke an ordinance of any kind, and say you got that fine in the mail, you have an abatement period to fix it before it actually is really a
Okay,
fine.
okay, well, that's good.
Yeah.
That was bothering me. And then the other is, if they're in violation of this ordinance, may also face liens on their property, but that would be if the fine is not paid, I presume. But that's
There-
not written in there.
There's, quite honestly, everything in yellow in that section. I spoke with Ms. Kane, with the finance, and those are all 100% possibilities that can happen. Now, I can tell you a lot of times, I can threaten you with a $100 fine. I can come back in a week, give you a $300 fine. Then if you talk to me bad, I'll come back the next day and give you the $500 fine. But sometimes these things get out of control, they get discussed, they go upstairs, they go downstairs, they come to you guys, they do all kinds of things. If you give them all of the possibilities that can happen, and one in particular is the audit. I discovered that, and Ms. Sharon Kane can certainly, and has the power to do so, audit
That one
any
bothered me a lot,
business.
too.
She has that authority. And
Well-
when you threaten someone that's not paying their transient taxes with an audit,
Right.
let me tell you, they'll run. Now, the reason I say it in this fashion is that sometimes
You usually laugh at mine.
it's choice.
You usually see your hand.
The fine is the easy, hey, got a little problem, need to pay taxes, or got a deficiency, or something's going on. If it gets really serious and we get thumbed up on the nose or whatever, these are our later transitional enforcement items.
Right.
So I'm just listing them as
Okay, I
worst case
understand
scenario.
that, but I think we need to couch it in verbiage that says, if you don't do this, this will happen. This is step number 1, this is step number 2. Don't threaten me with an audit, because what happens is you have people in power, and all of a sudden, something happens that's wrong. It's like, well, I'm going to audit you, and I can do it. Well, that's not right unless it is necessary, because they're not paying their fines.
We can set,
We
you
need to
know,
put something in there to say.
yeah, we
Yeah.
can
So many
simply set
days
how
and stuff like
high
that.
the fines can be.
Yeah, I would like that.
Until it triggers,
Yeah, okay.
you know, pulling your, business license
Yeah.
and/or,
Okay. That's
trust me,
fine.
an
I just
audit,
did- Yeah, I just.
trust me, an audit will probably never happen.
Yeah,
It's
but, you
just-
know, it's a threat, and threats can come to fruition, and I think we need to also control ourselves in how we threaten people.
What is a
Give 'em so
good
many
cap
days. Yeah.
on fines?
Give them
Would
so
you-
many days to.
Okay, yeah, that's all. So
Oh,
if
yeah.
you straighten that up, then.
Yeah,
I'm good.
all of our fine structures across all three departments downstairs are set up on an abatement period, like Tyler was saying. You know, based on the severity or the situation, it might be 3 days if you need to move a garbage can out of the road, or it might be 30 days if you need to fix your driveway or something silly. You know, a lot of common sense is applied.
Okay,
Um,
yeah,
But we can certainly cap the fines, and I don't have a bit of problem, you know, we cap the fines at, I'll just say some numbers, $2,000 or $3,000 or $1,000, what have you, before we get to, okay, we might have to discuss your business license because something's not happening.
okay,
And of course, we can send audit all the way down the end of the line, that's not a problem.
yeah. Well, you can audit, just make sure, well, it's because of reasonable,
Mm-hmm.
not just because I don't like you, you know, which I'm sure
Sure.
y'all wouldn't do, but
No,
just protecting.
audit was just
people.
presented as a
Last resort.
legal
Sure.
option.
Right. We'll make it a last resort. And
Sure.
I'd rather see it in writing than.
Well, I would not want to have to ask Ms. Sharon Kane, as busy as she is, to take time out of her day to go and help me with my problem. Okay, so I can assure you that is last
Yeah.
on my list, and Tyler can vouch for me. I don't like nobody doing anything for our department that we can do for ourselves.
Yeah.
We need to handle our own business. So, until
finish
we
this-
absolutely need somebody, we're
To
gonna do
finish
it.
this up, should we have a workshop meeting to discuss this, kind of give the pros and cons in the next 3 or 4 weeks with the lawyer there?
Sure.
Don't you think? Because he's going to have to do some things like sublease, all kinds of wood fees. Could we do, how often?
There's no rush, so I say.
Legit legal guy tell us what.
Excuse me?
We have the legitimate legal guy here to say that.
Yeah, we
I mean,
would
I
have to do
think you're
that.
right. I mean, there's a lot
But
of that
I
stuff.
don't
we-
want to do it without a lawyer around to look at it.
Then I also see.
It's just-
Assuming this is done.
Oh, I understand.
Yeah,
We just had 2 this past week, and I signed the first permit certificate, if you will, that we created so that we'd have something physical to actually hand somebody, to be displayed in their Airbnb, to look nice. And then my signature is going on that for final approval. And then what that will do is, once that is presented to Mackenzie, our business license associate, she then, in receipt of that, knows she can apply the business license and get these guys moving.
But we need some
But-
things changed before we say okay on that.
I was gonna say, what if we, when does this go before the city then? When does this go before them?
Not till.
After you.
after we,
I know after us, but when's our next
be next month.
Well,
October.
if I'm picking up what you're laying down, you know, we can survive. That, I appreciate the concern and the speed. I appreciate needing legal counsel. I don't want to do this twice. But certainly entertain a work session. We can get that moving and sent out and get it polished up in a work session.
Could we do it right before our meeting? Our next,
I don't think we
Well,
can get
we
it
tried
done.
that before, it didn't work very well.
I'm doing,
okay.
But we do need to get it really down so that you know what your stand, et cetera, when you do this. Don't you think
Sure, I'm
so?
all for it.
Yeah, I think so too.
Okay.
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 So visit this in the future, is what I'm hearing.
We will set up a work session and
Okay.
get information to you all on when that will be, in a timely manner.
So I guess I should make a motion to table this right now. shouldn't I?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll make a motion that we table the revision of the development ordinance, short-term rentals until our next meeting.
I'll second that.
That was you, Francis, right? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, Commissioner Shu,
Yes.
Commissioner Francis,
Yes.
Commissioner Short,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Miles,
Yes.
Commissioner Estelle.
Yes.
Okay.
Next is the revision of the development ordinance regarding HOA formation prior to final plat approval.
Since no one else is here to speak,
Yeah.
our
Architect of it.
Our council.
Yes,
Our
our council.
council is not here. He was gracious enough to actually put this motion together. And the cliff notes here is that anything with 5 lots or more, you're going to supply the creation of an HOA. I won't take his thunder, but he has done some research. He has put together what you see before you. What that means is that we would instill, prior to me approving, now, not aside your guys' approval, I'm talking about my approval with my signature on a final plat. Before I sign that, I will have to see the documentation set forth creating an HOA of any subdivision 5 lots or larger that must be presented to my department for review and approve that that is happening before I will turn loose a final plat. And that's essentially what this is saying.
Can I ask a question about that HOA? I think I know it, but I'm not sure. Everyone don't have to belong to HOA, right? Or do they?
This ordinance will state that you will.
Yeah,
Or you can't
Not
live
have
there.
to.
right.
Now,
So if I live in the subdivision and I don't want to,
now what has to happen? I think this might be the answer to what we're getting at here. Coming out of the gate, you will have to provide one, that it exists. And what that does is that creates that HOA, that entity. It prepares it. It doesn't mean at that moment that everybody that buys a lot is now succumbing to it. There is a percentage by, I believe, KRS statutes, it's somewhere between 75, 80%. Don't quote me on that. But once you reach that density of that development, those requirements of that HOA, those covenants and restrictions kick in. So you start paying, doing your thing. Now, in the event one falls apart that we have to check on, and I've already spoke with council on this previously, is that when I get these, he and I are going to sit down and we're going to go over them. And what he is going to look for is that provisions are set forth that if it were to diminish, demise, cancel, go away, that there's provisions within that sets aside requirements that any detention, any green space, anything of that nature outside of a piece of private property must revert either, by example, to a single lot or to a single entity, or it cannot be in those covenants and restrictions. So what that means is that somebody, even if it goes belly up, we will always have an entity that we can identify and have conversation with.
So how would you dictate where that property went to? Like, would it be just a neighbor next door decided they want it, or?
Well, honestly, it's going to happen at the developer's stage. So, he's asking you guys for approval on a final plat. It's got 100 lots in it. Well, okay, he has to dictate before HOA kicks in what you're asking for. Where does that lot perhaps go? Or how do you bust it up? Maybe you have 5 or 6 green spaces and you have 5 or 6 lots, or it's divvied up in some fashion. It's going to be based on the developer's choice, but he has to choose. and then that goes into those covenants and restrictions, and if something were to happen, then that clause kicks in, and then you still have a single entity, but it would be his decision. So your owner's coming in, here's the thing you have to be careful about. If I'm the realtor, and I sold you a lot, and you were the developer, and you said way before she comes along that she's going to inherit this 20 years from now if the HOA goes belly up, and she's not aware of it, you two aren't going to like each other. She may hunt you down, whether you're in Utah, California, or Japan. She may find you. That's a realism, okay? But what happens is, now you're my culprit. And you will have to take over the maintenance of whatever green space that the covenants and restrictions has set forth in his development. Now, that's what
That,
has been explained to me by council. So now,
That
is
way
there
we-
other ways? Possibly.
that way we don't run up with a situation like they've been dealing with, where basically the property just kind of, it lost ownership. Nobody owns it, nobody can take care of it.
You know, that's just the way out for that developer. I mean, it really is. If he knows that, and he says, well, you know, I don't want it, I mean, I got somebody, I've got somebody I could put it off on.
Well, he'll have to develop the HOA. Now, he's going to officially and legally hand it over to an effective functioning HOA, legal entity. The only way you get in trouble is if your subdivision wants to back out. And of course, that whole process has to take place for that to happen. But would that necessarily happen?
It
In your
is.
case, you didn't even get that far. You didn't get to the HOA saying it must be done. It never was done. We don't have anything that says that you must create the HOA and show us proof. Now, if we got to that point, using your subdivision for example, if I force them to give me anything 5 lots or more, the establishment, the creation, and doctrination of an HOA, and that it is handed over at certain percentile of the subdivision, then it gets created. And Scott, you have an HOA. Then Scott runs the HOA, perhaps life is great for a long, long time. The dues come in, you get funding for maintenance of the green spaces and detention area. Can something happen? Absolutely. Scott may run into his entire subdivision and say, we're tired of this. Well, the mechanism to save that would have to be, we need covenants by the developer up front. What happens if that were to take place? Now, we're rolling the dice now. Will that ever happen? If we're at this point, that we do have an HOA. It's happened, and we all know it's kind of happened before, but we've not been dealing with massive green spaces that are now being introduced by developers because they don't want to develop the hollers and the cliffs and the creeks and things of that nature. So quite frankly, well, it's green space. Well, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. But what happens when Scott has this happen to him? The only thing that we can do is make them show us that it is created before we give them the final plat so they can go out and sell lots.
Well, somebody has to be responsible for storm sewers sometimes and mowing the grass and doing the things. And that's what an HOA is that where everybody chips in and the grass is mowed, things are kept up, you have a fund, et cetera. So I can't see where you would not wish to be in it because you get some influence in it. And I can't see why you would not want to do it or dissolve it, because I think you'd have to have a lawyer to do it, and I think you'd also have to have a vote, wouldn't you, to disband it? See,
I'm
so I
sure
think
you
it would be
would.
difficult to disband, but most of the ones I've seen work pretty good. They do. They keep everybody in line. They keep the houses looking good. They keep other things doing good. So, sometimes you need that.
What happens if someone in HOA decides they don't want to be in it no more?
Probably shouldn't have bought a house in the subdivision.
Huh?
You're in it. I lived in Fieldstone. Trust me, I didn't want to give them my money.
Well,
But I didn't have a choice.
the reason why I asked, it's a subdivision not too awful far from here. They'll put a sign up, HOA payments are due. So evidently, somebody's not paying. And I've seen it up more than one time.
Well, you can take them to court,
And then what?
make them pay it,
Huh?
put a lien on
Put a
them.
lien on your property.
Yeah,
So in other words, they have to sign that to begin with, right?
yes.
Yep, you know when you're going in.
You know, we
You
go.
buy that into that subdivision with the HOA, you're joining that club.
If you don't want that, then don't go there.
Well, that's
Same way
what I'm
with a
getting ready to
pool
say.
and
I'm not
everything like
going.
that. You go in there with that you're gonna be, those expenses are gonna be yours.
But I still say that developer's a way out for him.
Well, he's not gonna do that forever.
He probably thought the same thing.
Well, I can't believe the developer would do it forever.
Well, he-
They're just not gonna do that.
I'm not saying, but whoever thought that would happen?
I would have thought the developer something, but HOAs, you would think that somebody would have started that. That's been around for a long time.
But as the developer has it initially. When he comes to you and he said, I want to build this subdivision with 5 or more lots to it or whatever, and has to prove that there's going to be an HOA with that. And he sells 4 out of those 5 lots, and he's still sitting on that one lot. And he sits on it and sits on it and sits on it for a while and finally says, I've had enough of this thing. I'm leaving. And so does that property now goes to the HOA or to a person that he dictates to? Like maybe it's Ms. Miles or someone, whoever he.
If I recall, and I can't speak for Mr. Frazier, but probably a question for him explicitly, but what this does, to my understanding, is that once it's created, it automatically, at a certain percentage, rolls into the HOA. So it's not so much that, well, I'm tired of this and I've sold 4 of my 5 lots. Well, due to that percentage rate, 4 out of 5, you've went way past 75 to 80%. You're already late. It should already be happening, and you can't get out of that. So if he's created it and he's in charge of it, he's our entity. He must pass it on. He can't, it goes to the HOA. It can't go to an LLC, it can on over to Tennessee and back and forwards and things of that nature. He is our person. And the one transaction that can happen is it goes straight to that HOA. That's the next transaction. Because we've got it up front and it's set. We're just waiting on the density to show up. And then at that time, well, I've got enough folks out here, here you go.
I think this one maybe falls into what you're asking. And again, we're not out west where we're building grid subdivisions. But if I don't have my green space and no requirements for that, do I even need my HOA at that point?
In that event, no.
So how do we determine to say, at the entrance, who's responsible for maintaining the entrance of the subdivision to keep it neat? Would it be that corner owner?
The whole place.
What's happening
So that's my question. If there's no
Yeah.
need for this, do they have to implement the HOA at that point?
the one thing that's gonna sneak up on them is that required recreation area is a necessity by ordinance, and your detention areas are required to be on their own lot. So that requires an ownership, because they're separate individual pieces of property. Now, they have functions, but they are individual pieces of property. Can't do anything with them, because they have been labeled green space. That's what this is. That's its function. detention area. That's what it is. It's its function, but they're on their own lot, so who's gonna take care of them? HOAs across the board, the answer. Now, we just need to make sure that the HOA is established to prevent what has happened.
It's gonna be hard on that developer too.
Yes,
Yeah.
well, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, please, just get up closer to us.
Make sure you hear me over the crowd.
Yeah,
Well, we appreciate everything you're doing, yeah. Yeah. Definitely want your input.
Okay, appreciate it. Are we on here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you are. So.
There we go. So number one, really appreciate you all following up on this. Means a lot to us in our neighborhood, and certainly we want to see the other residents in Richmond avoid the position we're in right now, which is limbo, as you can imagine. For two reasons, again, just to review. One of them was who's going to take care of these orphaned leftover pieces of property, number one. But number two, we also don't now have a person to check with, which we're required to do by law because of the restrictions that go with our deeds. If you want to do a fence, if you want to build a shed, if you want to build a pool, all those things, we are required by law because of the deed restrictions that go with each of our pieces of property to check with the developer. And you all have approved that system, and we now can't obey the law because the developers have used this, what not you, but Tyler, I think, called a legal shell game to use a quitclaim deed to get out from their responsibility, supposedly. So what this does, I think, is tries to catch, at least on the front end, at least catch the part where there's an HOA created. One of the problems right now is, your question is, why don't, Mr. Miller brought up, why don't you all just start an HOA? I think the challenge is, when we buy something, we all want to know what's the full cost up front. So we have 200 home buyers in our neighborhood who bought their home and what the paper we got, if we got it, and a number of neighbors maintained that they were never notified of this. I don't have any way to know that, I'm just telling you what they said. But what the paper that they got said, if 70% of the homeowners vote for an HOA, then we'll have an HOA. So if that's the paper you got, the other side of that coin is if we don't get 70% of an HOA, then we won't have an HOA, okay? So that's kind of the deal that you got by buying a home in there. So I think what Kevin's solution is looking for is if the developer goes ahead and is required to create it on the front end, then every homeowner, as they buy their piece of property, they will at least have fair notice that if you buy into this neighborhood, you are going to be buying into a neighborhood that has a HOA that kind of self-actuates once you hit a certain amount of percentage of homeowners that are now, however you decide, either when they purchase the property or when the house is finished or whatever it is. One of the challenges that I see with this is that number one is depending on how many total pieces of property are in that neighborhood, you could have a situation where the developers get all the profits that they think they're going to get out of that neighborhood, and then maybe they have some lots that are not going to sell well. We still, many years later, have 3 lots that haven't sold because they're, super steep or that kind of thing. So they may take all their really hilly land, their lots that aren't really going to sell anyway, and they may say, all right, we've squeezed our $15 million out of this neighborhood, and once they know where that target percentage is, then they just skate and say, okay, we're out of here, because, it's kind of a coefficient or it's kind of something we've set up that they know when they hit 70%, they can take off. So, yes, sir.
But that leaves an opportunity if you get in homeowners association, because you could fix those lots up, and if the lots go to you, you could sell them and make money for the homeowners association and for the maintenance of the property.
So is that, what Dr. Miller said, is that built into the ordinance? That if they leave, then all the leftover property becomes part of the HOA?
No, the individual properties remaining is identifiable by person, because
But if they
what they're avoiding is the non-buildable areas and things of that.
But if
nature.
they leave those properties, you had said that then they can convert to the homeowners association.
That would be the green space and the detention and things like that, correct? It wouldn't be like, say a developer still owned a lot that could have a house on it, they'd still own it, no matter where they are.
They just own it. It would sit there.
Those would never go to the HOA.
Say, hey, it's time to put sidewalk along the front of your lot.
Yeah. See, that's where if you had a homeowners
So they don't ever
association,
give up
you'd
right
have
of
some power
ownership.
to do some things.
Not for a viable lot they could sell. But what's interesting, what Scott brings up, I wish I'd known about, would be the fact that you said, hey, at 70%, if you want a HOA, we'll entertain one. I can tell you now, I would have already had a huge problem with that, because I already know there's green spaces out there that have to be taken care of. If I was part of that conversation, ever how many years ago that was, I can assure you we wouldn't be here right now. That would have been caught. No. Something's gotta be done now, because I know we have individual green spaces out here, and you can't tell me we're not gonna have an HOA. I know good and well, we gotta have maintenance here. That would have been caught. That's an unfortunate, truly is. But, moving forward, we would have spelled out all of the covenants and restrictions within that document. So, not so much conferring with the developer, you would actually be looking at a document that can't be changed on a whim. It's already set, so that when you're first in the subdivision, all you do is read black and white. It doesn't change throughout the subdivision. When you're last, you see the exact same document that you saw 6 years earlier. And it's in steel. It's passed along. There's no changing. It's set up front. It's established.
So question on that. So in our neighborhood, I think we had something along the line of 7 phases. The restrictions actually were not the same in all of the phases. So you're saying that one of the things we would implement is to ensure that the deed restrictions or the HOA restrictions would be identical no matter how many phases they.
The common sense thing there is, I know we're on TV. If we use Magnolia Point, for an example, we still are remaining tons, and those guys are doing great out there, and they're making their way over to Union City. And our next phase is 8, and we're not even getting close yet. But it would be the common sense that, that is Magnolia Point. It should be the same, one would think, from, all the way behind the dealerships, all the way to Union City. Should be the same rules, because it's the same project. I feel that common sense would tell me I would want those the same. Now, we could inherit, like we did at Arbor Woods, and down on Pavilion and Golden Leaf. We had a guy come in and he purchased the entire second phase of that subdivision from the original developer. And they have a little bit different idea of rules and regulations. A little odd, but they established what they wanted to do. They actually separated the CBUs and all sorts of kind of things, but that can happen. But common sense would tell me if you have a subdivision, it should be the same, but we're gonna run into something sooner or later that somebody picks up a phase and decides to build it and take your phase, and then you buy it, and you got a different idea of what fences you want or what have you. That could happen.
When you purchased your property, is it somewhere in your agreement that the green space is taken care of? Do you know?
Well, the key thing I have to respond to that is numerous people told us that they were not provided with the, what's it called, the covenants and restrictions, basically. They told they were not provided with the covenants and restrictions. So unless you saw that document, they wouldn't have got anything on the green spaces. For us, the only green spaces, if you call them that, are just the detention ponds. So it's not like these are parks and, buffer zones and things like that. They're literally the required detention areas for flood control. Kevin, for 100-year floods, more or less. Is that right?
A technical way to describe them, Scott, in my mind, would be that you have detention facilities with expanded property outside of really what it needs. And therefore, you get the word green space because the detention area resides within the green space, but it's only a portion of it. Or you have just a big area dedicated to a detention area. I mean, it's.
So you have really overgrown areas, is that your issue?
Well, so that's kind of what kicked this off is I had a number of neighbors that were saying, hey, who's mowing all this stuff down, in our backyard? So you'd have, for instance, Meridian right here, and then you'd have Auckland right here, and they'd look in their backyard and, the grass is as tall as my daughter's, up here, and they're like, what happened here? And what happened was the developers had just stopped mowing it. And that was kind of our first indication that something was going on.
But they had an agreement with the city to maintain, did they not?
They did, and so the steps were, and just reviewing a little bit of what I've shared before, is that unbeknownst to us, they had prepared this is one of the 4 developers, had in his legal office prepared a quitclaim deed and portrayed that they had given or conveyed this property to this LLC in Memphis, Tennessee. No one in Tennessee was involved with this, only people in their office, and the person that signed for this property was this attorney's paralegal, signed for it for this corporation. So then subsequent to that, and after that, they still mowed it a time or two, not sure why. But eventually, then they quit mowing it, and then when we went to them, they said, oh, we're out of it now. Interestingly, they are still, at least last time I looked, they're still listed as an entity, Meridian Partners LLC, still listed on the state site, and someone is still paying for that LLC in Memphis. My guess is they are being written checks from Meridian Partners. So when Kevin and I talked about this, he said, don't worry, we know who's involved with this, we'll make sure they're responsible. But my understanding is our attorney has told you that, in fact,
The shell game.
The shell game, yeah, we can't hold them responsible because this trick.
And I know it's not eminent domain, but can the city not force, somehow claim this property that's not being taken care of and revert it back to the subdivision so that they can, like Dr. Miller said, sell it, try to recoup something from
The
it?
challenge with that is not necessarily a legal question, but think of it functionally. If you bought, we all pay our mortgage for our homes, and we agreed to buy this 1/5 of an acre roughly in R1C for, let's say, $250,000, okay? If someone says, hey, we're going to get all this property that you now have to mow and pay to mow, and you'll have liability for it, do you want that deal?
Right, I see.
That's,
Well, I mean, I think you've got 2 choices. You can't sue anybody, for it to get them to do it. And you've got to do the homeowners association. You've got to go around and try to, you've got to have a homeowners association, and you've got to go ahead and go to the individual houses, and maybe you can get some people to help you and get a form and file it. You have to go to a lawyer to get a form.
I understand the process, but the problem is, I can go create an LLC as a neighborhood association. You don't need a vote to do that. I can just go do it. But what you said is the exact same thing as saying, if you don't like your president, well, we'll all just decide to vote for a better president, and they'll be here tomorrow. The problem is we have to convince 70% of all our homeowners to now take on this financial and potentially liability responsibility that they didn't know about when they bought their homes. So even all the people that would be 100% for an HOA, they're in the position of they can't get that done without 139 of the other homeowners.
So you don't think you can get 70%?
I don't.
No doubt.
I don't. That's from talking with a number. Some are for, it's like anywhere. It's a bell curve. Some are violently opposed, some are for it, and there's a lot in the middle, but
Well, why would you be violently opposed? It's taking care of your subdivision. It's doing what's the right thing to do for your subdivision. I mean, otherwise, they're putting it on the city to mow and do everything else for them, and that's not right.
yeah, I don't think we're putting it on it. I think the developers are putting it on the city because they didn't maintain their responsibility.
Well, I agree with that, but you can't expect the developers to do it forever.
I 100% expect them to do it until
Not
the
forever.
HOA, because that's what our paperwork said.
I mean, I can't believe anybody put down that they do it forever. I mean, I've never seen that, and most developers will say they're not going to do it forever. They give it a homeowners association, or they give the land to you, or they do something. But apparently, I've just never seen it like that, so.
But you know
and you
this-
haven't either, obviously.
But it's really not, and I can understand their point of view, because it's not my problem to take over their problem.
Can the city put
He said it
liens?
perfectly, yeah.
I
On
mean,
the property?
they're actually taking over their problem when they should have been doing it in the first
I
place.
mean, the developer.
Develop.
But the developer is not
it's-
going to do that forever.
I know,
But if they sell those,
But I can see their
any of
point.
those,
I mean,
Well,
they're
I
not
see
gonna
their
sell
point.
any of
Their
those
point is gone now.
unsold.
They're gone.
You're not
So
gonna get,
you
like I
guys
said.
have a
lots, are they?
So-
you're not gonna
You're never going to get
70%.
the HOA at this point, so somebody needs to
Hard to
accept.
So here's an,
That's the only
here's
card
an
you've
example.
got,
You do it.
is you've got those
Since we'd like to
unsold
help with the
lots, right?
solutions,
And you could put liens on
You-
all of those.
an example is these homeowners,
They-
you know what the economy's like, and if you're just paying for your home and paying for your bills,
You have to-
when they say, hey, here's, we want you to start paying now an HOA
Yeah.
fee or whatever, and,
Yeah.
$5,000 or $20,000 of mowing and other things, at the same time, we just wanted to buy a home. The developers, on the other hand, they were making $15 million worth of sales, so would it be that hard for them to put, I don't know, 50 or whatever $1,000 in a fund of some kind to make sure that that is taken care of? And even if they want to step out of being the mediator, which again, we're required to check with, then you could have it where it automatically went over to, if the HOA isn't formed, then they could hire a company to be that mediator that you check with to get things approved. And then, if the neighborhood says either we'll use the mediator that they've left behind, or then if we have enough incentive, maybe we'll create an HOA. But at least it eliminates the possibility of the orphan system, which is what we got right
That's all
now.
looking backwards.
Go ahead.
That's all looking backwards.
Well-
And hoping those, and they should have done some of that. I agree. But that's not the case. So,
But looking forward, we could do the same thing.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask.
That's where we are right now.
We've asked Tyler this. Instead of making new developers create HOAs, which I'm really not a fan of, can we go ahead and if we could ask Tyler, when they do the deed transfers, and that deed transfer saying you are responsible to this backline is your responsibility in the absence of a community HOA. And then at that point, if it's not kept up, the city now has a lot, an owner of that lot to say, you need to clean up your mess.
You signed for to do this.
Instead of us forcing people to become, that'd be the rest of the city of Richmond forever. Everybody's in an HOA, and not everybody wants that. Just a question.
Well, that's why I had to ask yesterday. We was in a meeting, and I said, well, who all does this apply to exactly? 5 lots or more.
So that,
What we could do is,
put it on the side.
with the absence of council, put that with our work session.
Yeah.
and hash all this out with legality and what we can do, what we want to do. We're certainly at a point where something is about to happen because we have written documentation that we're already starting to review. So,
What do you mean by something's about to happen?
we're working toward eliminating your orphan system from ever happening again.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
Yes.
All right.
So, when I say something about, is about that, I'm sorry,
Okay.
is that we now have something written to review, to consider for this board's consideration and things, to make recommendations, so we can send that on up the line, so that my department will have something to specifically look for to stop it. But I feel that the council is definitely needed here, from what I hear. We can include this in our next work session that we'll set up, and we'll get the details worked out.
Yeah, you just, of course, I just feel so sorry because you had the two situations, like you say, the one, the orphan property problem, then also your issue, and I didn't realize the part as far as if you wanted to do an improvement and you had to ask an entity, where's the entity? So now you're in limbo.
We have no one to check with. We can't legally do that. Yeah, and so, we just bought into this system,
Yeah.
and you all approved it. And we're not here to point fingers or anything, we just are here for solutions. So we'd like very much to be part of your work session, if that's okay with you.
Oh, sure.
Just call me.
We'll do it. Okay. All right, any other questions?
Nope.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all very much. Really appreciate you all working on this,
Absolutely.
very much.
So what I hear is that we're tabling, right?
Tabling.
We'll look at the same time.
Make a motion to table.
Motion we table to
Thank
Yeah.
Okay, I
I'll
appreciate it.
second.
Hope I wouldn't,
All good information.
Commissioner Shu,
Yes.
Commissioner Francis, Commissioner Short,
Yes.
Commissioner Miller,
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins, Commissioner Miles, Commissioner Sa-
Not early, we just tabled it.
I know.
Okay, that's it.
Adjournment?
Yep.
The director's report.
He's got adjournment on it.
Yeah, that,
Oh, no.
Conference that we attend every year. Got a lot to do with stormwater, all kinds of things of that nature. We won't get into that. Our wonderful Tyler has opted to stay behind and man the fort.
What a sacrifice.
Boy, party.
But,
Time and a half for this year?
well, he opted to stay, so we can't reward him too well. But no, the department will be left in very capable hands. And of course, we're not just at conference missing. We're on our phones, we're conducting business, we're communicating with Tyler, so nothing stops. We just physically aren't here.
And
So-
that's why we're here tonight, instead of next week.
Yes. One reason. But anyway, mostly. So, other than that, we're excited. We're getting some things done. This being part of it, as we move forward, make things a little easier for my team. So if we know we're going, we can get there. And, with your all's help, we much appreciate it.
Thank you. Aye.